You know how sometimes a name just kind of pops up everywhere?
Yeah.
You think, okay, what's this about?
Yeah, happens all the time.
Well, in the domain world lately, that name is Swetha, and she's tied to some really big sales figures for .xyz domains.
Oh, yeah. Like, what kind of figures are we talking?
Well, Quest.xyz reportedly sold for nearly $70,000,
70,000. Wow. Okay.
and Sportsbit.xyz over 100,000.
Okay, that definitely gets your attention, especially, for .xyz domains. They haven't typically hit those kinds of prices historically.
Exactly, and that's what makes it so interesting and controversial, frankly. It's why we're doing this deep dive today.
Right. Because it's not just, hey, look at these big sales. It's more like, are these real?
Yeah.
Is this sustainable?
Precisely. Are these legit high-value deals showing .xyz maybe entering a new phase? Or, like some people are whispering online, is there something else going on?
Mm-hmm. Questions about Swetha herself, like who she actually is and whether these sales are genuine, those are definitely floating around.
They really are.
Yeah.
And it kind of forces you to think about, well, how do we value these digital things? And who do you trust?
Absolutely. So that's our mission here today for you listening. We're going to unpack this. We've looked at, forum discussions, sales reports, trying to get a handle on the allegations, the evidence.
Yeah, from both sides, right? The critics and the supporters.
Exactly. And what it all might mean for domain investing generally.
So if you want to get up to speed on this, uh, pretty intriguing, maybe a bit complex situation, this is the place. We'll cut through the chatter.
Let's dive in. First off, Swetha. Who is she supposed to be?
Okay, so from what we've gathered, she's been involved in domain investing since at least 2015, and her focus seems to be specifically on .xyz domains.
Right. And she wasn't completely unknown before this blew up, right? She had online profiles.
Yeah, exactly. She used handles like @DNGear on NamePros, which is a big domain forum, and @DomainNameGear over on X, formerly Twitter.
Okay, and that online history is actually part of the controversy, isn't it?
It is, because one of the main things people are questioning is her actual identity. Like, is Swetha a real person doing these deals?
And what fuels that doubt?
Well, a big trigger was her X account @DomainNameGear, getting suspended back in April 2025.
Ah, okay.
And around the same time, her NamePros account @DNGear was deleted.
Right. That combination, suspension and deletion. It always makes people suspicious in online communities.
Totally. It immediately led to speculation. Could this be a fake persona? Some have called it a possible shill alias, just a made-up name, maybe used to pump up the market.
Mm-hmm, a shill. And that ties into the other big allegation, which is about the sales themselves.
Exactly. The idea is, okay, if the identity is questionable, maybe the sales are too. Are they fabricated? Just like paper transactions designed to make .xyz look hotter than it is.
And they point to specific examples.
Yeah, like Bolt.xyz, reportedly sold for nearly $80,000.
80,000, okay.
But then people compared it to Bolt.org, which apparently sold for only around 10,000.
Ooh, that's a big difference. 80 versus 10 for the same word, essentially.
Right. So that huge gap makes people ask, what's going on here? Is it market manipulation? Some have even, thrown around words like money laundering or bribes, though there's no proofs.
Wow, okay, so those are serious claims.
And there's even been some loose talk, again, unsubstantiated, about maybe a connection to the XYZ registry itself.
That kind of price difference, though, it really highlights how tricky domain valuation can be, especially with newer extensions where you don't have decades of data, perceived value versus actual demand.
For sure. And like you said, when an active account just vanishes,
Hmm.
people get worried, especially when money's involved.
Yeah, it rings alarm bells. So, okay, let's break down the evidence the critics are using. Beyond the account suspensions and those price gaps, what else are they pointing to?
Well, those high prices are central. Critics argue they just don't make sense compared to similar words on .com or .org.
The established extensions.
Right. And some sources also bring up the history of the .xyz TLD itself. It's faced some controversy before, including lawsuits related to how it was initially rolled out.
Okay, so there's some background context there that might make people more skeptical now.
Possibly. And then there are these whispers, sort of vague mentions about potential government investigation.
But nothing solid on that.
No, it's crucial to state that. Our sources found no actual evidence of any official investigation, just, online chatter.
Got it. So context, price anomalies, account issues, that's the critical view. But what about the other side? Is there evidence supporting Swetha and these sales?
Yes, and this is where it gets more complex. Despite the doubts, there is counter-evidence For instance, several of these big sales, they've apparently been verified
Verified how? By who?
by platforms like Afternic, which is a major marketplace, and NameBio, which tracks sales data. They've reportedly confirmed some of these transactions.
Okay, verification by third-party platforms is significant.
Yeah, and there's a specific example, Reactor.xyz, sold for $45,000. And in that case, screenshots from escrow.com, the payment processor, were apparently shared as proof.
Ah, escrow screenshots. That does add a layer of credibility, at least to that specific deal.
It does seem pretty concrete for that one, yeah. What else is working in her favor?
Well, there's the public support from Daniel Nagari.
The CEO of the XYZ registry.
Exactly. He's actually called Swetha an inspiring figure and stated she's an independent investor.
So the head of the registry is vouching for her independence.
Seems so.
Yeah.
He's also said that XYZ, the company, doesn't promote .xyz just for speculation, even though they obviously appreciate the attention these sales bring. That endorsement carries some weight.
Definitely. And didn't you mention she wasn't totally new? She had a history on NamePros.
Right, that's another point. Sources show she was active on NamePros going back to 2018, not just lurking, but participating.
Like actually buying and selling.
Yeah, there are reports of her winning auctions. For example, West.xyz. Apparently, she won it against other known users who were bidding on names like Phase and Swarm at the same time.
Okay, so that suggests actual real-time participation in the market over several years.
It does. It makes the completely fabricated persona idea a bit harder to swallow, you know? Plus, she's done interviews before.
Oh, really?
Looks like one in July 2020 and another in November 2021, where she talked about her strategy, her portfolio. And apparently, more recently, she indicated she might be open to chatting again.
So, documented history, verified sales, CEO support. It paints a different picture.
It certainly complicates the narrative. So what has Swetha herself said about all this recent drama?
Well, since the first X account was suspended, she started using a new one at Swetha and she's addressed the controversy there.
And her take is?
She flatly denies any connection to the XYZ registry. Her logic is, look, if I worked with them or for them, wouldn't I be pushing all their extensions, not just .xyz?
That's an interesting point. Plausible on the surface.
Yeah. And she's also suggested that maybe some of the criticism is just jealousy, people seeing her success and getting envious.
Okay, attributing it to jealousy, that's one way to frame it. It probably doesn't satisfy everyone asking about the suspensions, though.
Probably not. And just to be clear, the XYZ registry's official stance remains consistent. Nagari supports her as independent, and they state they don't push .xyz for speculation.
Right, so we've got the big sales, the questions, the evidence for and against the responses. Let's pull back a bit. What's the impact of all this on .xyz domains, on the wider community?
It seems like it's cutting both ways, definitely.
How so?
Well, on the one hand, you can't deny these sales have brought a lot of eyeballs to .xyz, massive visibility.
Sure, big numbers make headlines.
And that could attract new investors, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially people maybe involved in, like, blockchain, Web3, crypto, areas where .xyz has been trying to gain traction.
Yeah, that Quest.xyz sale, wasn't the buyer supposedly a blockchain company?
That's the report, yeah, which fits that narrative. And some people in the domain community do see her success as inspirational, like, wow, she spotted an opportunity.
Okay, so that's the potential upside. Increased interest, maybe validation in certain tech circles. What's the downside?
The flip side is all the skepticism we've been talking about. The allegations, the account suspensions. It's definitely made some investors nervous.
Wary, understandably. Might put them off buying .xyz altogether.
Could do, or at least make them much more cautious. We've seen chatter warning people against buying lower quality .xyz domains, just hoping for a quick flip.
Especially if, as some reports suggest, the total number of registered .xyz domains has actually been dropping.
Exactly. If overall registrations are down, it makes those super high sales look even more like outliers, potentially risky ones if you're thinking of jumping in.
So the community is kind of split then.
Very much seems that way. You've got some folks looking at her as, a smart operator, maybe even a pioneer for .xyz. But then you have others who are deeply suspicious, thinking it's maybe some kind of scam or manipulation.
Which leaves .xyz in a weird spot, more visible than ever maybe, but also under more scrutiny than ever.
Precisely. It's this complex mix of increased interest and simultaneously heightened caution.
Okay, so let's try to boil this down. As we wrap up this deep dive, what are the main takeaways for you listening right now?
Well, I think the first thing is it's not clear-cut. There are serious questions about Swetha's identity and whether all these sales are squeaky clean.
Right. But you also have verified sales data from reputable sources and industry figures supporting her as a real independent investor who has done legitimate deals.
So she seems to be a real person making real transactions, at least some of the time. But the skepticism isn't going away easily.
No, especially with those account suspensions still largely unexplained and the sheer size of some sales compared to market norms, that keeps the doubt alive.
And for .xyz domains themselves.
Again, it's that double-edged sword. They've gotten a huge publicity boost, which could be good long term, but it comes packaged with this cloud of controversy, meaning investors are probably going to be, and maybe should be, a lot more careful, more due diligence needed.
Definitely. So maybe the final thought to leave you with is this. When you look at this whole situation, the verified stuff, the unanswered questions, what does it really tell us about trust? About doing your homework in these fast-moving digital asset markets?
Yeah, and how do you as an investor navigate that kind of uncertainty, especially with newer things like alternative TLDs? It really makes you think hard about how value is created or perceived online.
And encourages you to really dig deeper than the headlines, right?
Yeah.
Consider all the angles before jumping to conclusions.